I recently made a tool Geo-nodes camera for camera animations in Blender. Now the tool is improved and has more features like gizmos, orbit tilt, point of view camera, and now you can directly track geometry nodes instances. You can switch between target instances and camera instances with just one click. You can also use other domains like points or faces. All it needs is a target input and a camera input. You can get it on Superhive, link is in the description. It works with Blender 4.3 and later versions. Okay, let's see how it works. Once you download the blend file, open it, and you can see in the outliner there is a collection called Geo-nodes camera, and it has been marked as an asset. So you have to take this file and paste it inside your Blender assets folder. You can check in preferences in file paths. This is where your Blender assets folder will be. Now you can use it in any scene. I'm using Blender version 4.5. Let's start with a fresh scene and delete everything. Now let's import the camera from the asset browser. You can see it as a thumbnail, Geo-nodes camera. Drag it in your scene and always make sure that this instance checkmark is off. Okay, now here is the camera setup. And in the collection, we have a plane and a camera. Let's make it the active camera. The plane object has been disabled for renders. The camera is parented to the plane. So you have to click on the plane, bring it to center, and go to the modifier tab. Now this is the modifier rack. Only use the plane object and a modifier rack for any animations. Don't move the camera directly. You can move the plane or you can move through the modifier rack settings. Let's see how to use it. Let's take a cube as a target and move it away. Now pick the cube as a target object and click on track target. Now you can see there are two gizmos. This gizmo is for the target object and this gizmo is for the camera setup. Let's look through our camera. If you move this gizmo, the camera is pointing towards this target. So this gizmo controls the target position value and this gizmo is for moving the camera setup. It controls the camera position value. So you can move the target and the target will always be in center. Or you can move the camera by moving the plane or by moving the gizmo. You can also attach your camera to another object and track your target at the same time. Let's take a sphere as the camera object. Now go to the camera object and pick the sphere. Let's make the offset 0. Okay, now it's inside the sphere. Let's move it a little bit outside. Now if you move the sphere, the camera will move along with the sphere. This helps if you want to animate an object and attach your camera to that object. So if I give it an animation, the camera is moving along with the sphere and tracking the cube at the same time. Here is an example where the camera is attached to a fighter plane and tracking another fighter plane. Using the target gizmo, you can animate between two targets. Give a keyframe to target position. Now you can see the camera is animating between the two targets. Now you can snap your camera directly onto geometry nodes instances. Here is an animation made using geometry nodes, which is a bunch of cubes moving around randomly. This is the setup for this animation. Now if I want to track these cubes, go to the modifier and select the target object as any one of these cubes and click on track target. Now the camera is looking at the center of this object. So if I go to this object and turn off the geometry node setup, it's a regular cube on which the geometry nodes has been applied. So it is looking at the center of this particular object. Now if I turn back on the geometry nodes, when the target instance is at 0, it will look at the origin of the main object. These cubes are all instances. Now if I want to start tracking them, I must increase the target instance. Now the camera is tracking one of the cubes and the target gizmo appears on this cube. Now if I change the target instance, you can see the target gizmo is shifting to the next cube. So you can select any instance and track that particular cube. And in this setup, we have total of 12 instances, so 12 cubes. So if I go over 12, let's say the target instance is 13. Now it is not tracking anything. If I move this offset, the plane is tracking its own object center. So if I go to this and turn off the geometry nodes modifier, this is the origin point of this particular plane. So if it's returning a 0 value, it will track its own center. So always make sure that the target instance is within the maximum number of instances. Now, if I want to move the camera along with one of these cubes and track the cubes at the same time, so go to the camera object, again click on any of the cubes. If I turn the offset to 0, the camera is currently attached to the center of the main object because the camera object instance is at 0. Now if I increase the instance, you can see that it is attaching itself to one of the cubes. Give it some offset. So you can see that the camera is moving along with this cube and tracking another cube. So with just one click, you can change the camera object or the target object. Also, if you want to use this in combination with normal geometry, let's take a sphere. I want to track this sphere while the camera is moving along with these cubes. For the target object, I will select the sphere. So this is just a regular object. It has no instances. So now I can change the camera object instance and it will still track the sphere. Similarly, you can attach the camera to the sphere, give it some offset and track one of these instances. You can always use the target gizmo to offset your target. So you can change the instance number and have your camera track any of these cubes. We can also use it as a point of view camera. If I turn on the POV camera, the camera will stick to whichever object is selected in the camera object, and we don't need track target for this. So with POV camera, the camera not only moves to the position of the camera object but also changes its orientation. So if you have an animated object, for now let's use one of these cube instances. If I pick any of the cubes, the camera is not only attached to the cube, but it is also orienting according to the cube's motion. And whichever instance you choose, you can immediately snap the POV camera to that particular instance. However, if I use track target, let's give some offset again, then the camera will track the very object that it is attached to, and it will remain in that particular locked position. You can also move the target gizmo. So if I give some offset to the target gizmo, the camera will remain locked in that position. In this file, there are two fighter jets moving along a path. So let's try to attach a POV camera using our camera modifier. And select the camera, make it the active camera. Pick the camera object as any of the airplanes and turn on POV camera. Now you can see the camera is not perfectly oriented. We can fix that by changing the rotation offset. Now let's see through our camera and let's frame our composition using the offset. And now we get a perfect point of view of our moving airplane. Now if we select the other airplane in the camera object, so with ease you can attach a POV camera to any of your animated objects. And if you use track target, our camera is pointing away. That's because we have given an offset to the rotation. Now the camera is looking at the target. Using the offset, you can change the camera position. Now the camera will track the plane from any angle that you want. You can also shift the target gizmo and frame the composition according to your preference. You can even animate the camera position offset to make some cool flybys of your plane. The next option we can see in the rack is track target. If you turn off track target, the camera will look in its default direction. So you can choose if you want to make the camera look at a target or look in a default direction. The next option is follow target. So follow target works a little bit like POV camera. And in follow target, the camera snaps to the position of whatever object is selected in target object. And also it follows the same principle of snapping to any instance. In follow target, if you move the target gizmo, the camera would follow the gizmo. The difference between follow target and POV camera is that in follow target, the camera does not change the orientation according to the target object. If follow target is on, the object selected in the camera object will be ignored and it will snap to the position of target object. And if you also turn on POV camera at the same time, the camera would snap to whatever is selected in camera object. Next we come to the orbit settings. All these settings from here on are for orbit animations. Let's turn off POV camera for this. So if we turn on show orbit, a circle will appear around our camera object. The radius of this circle depends upon the camera position offset. So if camera position is 0, then you won't be able to see the circle. Bring it out in the Z direction. The X and Y direction is what gives the length of the radius of the orbit. If you turn on auto orbit, the camera will orbit any object that the camera is attached to. It can also work with follow target and it can also work with POV camera. The option below is for orbit speed. If you increase the orbit speed, the camera will slow down, so it works inversely. The lesser the amount in the orbit speed, the faster the camera will orbit. And if the orbit speed is in negative, the camera will orbit in the opposite direction. And it will work the same. The lesser the value, the faster will be the orbit speed. Time unit is for when you use auto orbit. You have two settings, frames and seconds. If you select frames, the animation will be based on the number of frames. And if you select seconds, the animation will be based on time. So even if you change the frame rate of the animation will remain in the same speed. So if you want to keep your animation uniform across different frame rates, it is better to use seconds, otherwise you can go with frames. Now the next option is orbit offset. The orbit offset will make the camera go around the circle to whatever angle is selected in the orbit offset. You can also animate this to specifically move the camera in a certain arc. Tilt angle will tilt the angle of the orbit circle, and rotate tilt will rotate the angle of the tilt. Let's use it with follow target and use it with auto orbit. So now the camera is orbiting this cube instance at a tilted angle. The next option is the target position, which we have already seen. It will control the position of the target gizmo. Since follow target is on, the camera will move with the target, and if follow target is off, the camera will look in the direction of the target gizmo. Camera position is what we can control with camera gizmo. And finally you have camera rotation. You can give the camera rotation an offset which will be separate from the offset of the target position. When the camera rotation will be at 0, the camera will look perfectly at the target gizmo. You can also give it a camera shake using noise modifier. By default, this tool works only with instances. But if I want to work with some other domains, let's say I want to track the vertices or faces of this sphere, then you have to go into the geometry nodes and make few changes. So first, let's pick the sphere and click on track target. Now, you have to click on the plane, go to the geometry node tree. You can see there are two group nodes. One is for target position and one is for camera object position. So for the target position, you have to go in this group node called target position and change the domain to whatever you want. For now, let's take point, and outside, take the output of this node and plug it directly into this reroute node. You can see that it's returning a 0 value. That's because our target instance is at 0. If I increase the target instance, the target gizmo is attached to one of the vertices. As I increase the instance, it is snapping to the next vertex. You can also do it with face or edge. Now let's say I want to attach the camera to any of these cubes domain. Pick the camera object as the cube. Similarly, go to the geometry node tree. Here you can see there is a group called camera position. Change the domain to, let's use face this time. And take the output of this node and connect it to this readout node. Now again, first it is returning a 0 value. So if I increase the instance, it is snapping to one of the faces. If you go over the number of faces, like a cube has 6 faces, it will again return a 0 value. So remain within the maximum number of the domain. Okay, now it's snapped to the front face. So that's how you can work with other domains. It also works similarly with geometry nodes objects. And lastly, make sure there is no active camera node in any geometry nodes object that we are tracking. For example, if I take this setup and use an active camera node, and even if it's not connected to anything, when I go to my camera and select the target, you can see that the camera setup is broken. So avoid using active camera tool if you want to work with this camera modifier. You can click on the camera and change camera settings like focal length or depth of field at any point. Alright, go play around with the tool and create amazing things yourself. And subscribe to the channel.